Good morning. Welcome in the name of Christ. We are excited to have you joining us for this morning's message. Today's lesson is taken from the book of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. It is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Well, it's an issue we keep hearing about on the news. In fact, I heard a report about it just the other day. America is getting fatter. If we look around the room today, how many of us would benefit from losing some weight? I know I certainly could stand to lose a few pounds. One of the things we left behind when we moved here from our previous appointment was a membership to a local gym. Now, I'm not talking about a room with a few pieces of exercise equipment in it. The Salvation Army's Kroc Center in Quincy, Illinois, was a brand new 98,000 square foot facility that included many amenities such as an indoor pool, a theater, and other things, as well as a state-of-the-art gym with personal trainers on staff that were available to help you. Many of our church folks at our former church were members at the Kroc Center and exercised on a regular basis. Several folks we knew who struggled with their fitness levels and were told to lose some weight by their doctors were successful in doing so because they hired a personal trainer who held them accountable in their exercise routines. According to a recent article in Men's Journal, author Lauren Steele states that working out with a personal trainer increases your fitness goal success rate by over 30%. According to a study published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine, the study found that the influence of direct supervision during workouts had a huge effect on the outcome of training. When you stop to think about how overweight we have become as a nation and how out of shape the average American is, you would not guess that we spend over $5 billion in gym subscriptions. However, we also know that there are a large number of people who pay for gym memberships but seldom ever go to the gym and work out. The study also found that when people were serious enough about losing weight and getting into shape that they hired a personal trainer, their rate of success increased substantially. So why does working out with a personal trainer make such a difference? A reputable personal trainer has been trained in exercise theory, instruction, and nutrition. They are knowledgeable about the many different forms of exercise and the effect exercise has pertaining to weight loss and fitness levels. Trainers also assess their clients' abilities to perform the various exercises they might prescribe. They will set goals, track progress, and encourage their clients to stick to their exercise routines. They can also provide education about general health, diet, and nutrition. Now, I am sure that all of us understand the importance of being in good physical condition. After all, who among us would not benefit from losing a few pounds and getting into better physical shape? Likewise, most of us could do a better job of keeping ourselves in better spiritual shape. When it comes to our spiritual health, a great number of Americans have just let themselves go. They have become even more fat, flabby, and out of shape in their spiritual lives than they are in their physical lives. As I said, many people have a gym membership but seldom ever actually go to the gym. One internet site that I visited said that out of the people they polled who had gym memberships, only about 18% actually showed up to work out on a regular basis. Likewise, there are a lot of people who have a church membership but seldom ever show up for worship so they can stay in good spiritual condition. Being part of a church is like having a personal trainer for our spiritual growth and fitness. As the people of the church, we are to encourage one another and hold each other accountable to do the things that keep us spiritually healthy and strengthens our faith. In our lesson for today, Jesus points out one of the fundamental practices for staying in top spiritual shape. It is the practice of forgiveness. I say practice because it is something that we must work at every day in order to become better at doing it. And just like an athlete or a musician, The more that we practice at it, the more proficient we become. One of the most important rules about forgiveness that we must never forget is that we always have a choice to forgive or not to forgive. Forgiveness always begins with a choice and then becomes a process. Jesus urges us to make the choice for ourselves when he answers Peter's question about the number of times we are willing to forgive someone who has hurt us in some way. Lord, Peter asks, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus answers, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Some other translations read 77 times. But whichever one you want to use, it's fine because it doesn't change the point that Jesus is trying to make. His point is that you should forgive others as many times as is necessary. We are not to keep track of how many times. We are simply to choose to forgive others because it is what God has asked us to do. And because it is also the best thing we can do for our own spiritual and emotional health. Unfortunately, so many people in our culture today choose not to practice forgiveness. And with the unchurched segment in our society continuing to grow, some of the most basic principles of the Christian faith are not being taught and passed down to the next generations as they once were. In our lesson today, Jesus tells this simple story and tries to teach the importance of forgiveness, and forgiveness with no strings attached. So Jesus tells this story about a servant. Let's look a little closer at this story and update the language a bit to make it more like terms we would use today. Let's change the servant to employee, for instance, and call him Bernie. Bernie owes an enormous sum of money to his boss, what would be several $1,000,000 in today's money. And he decides to call in the loan and tells Bernie, it's time to pay up. Now, in first century Palestine, it was perfectly legal to sell a man's wife and children into slavery and sell all that he owned in order to settle his debts and allow his creditors to at least recoup some of what he is owed. Well, Bernie knows he cannot pay his debt, and recognizing the spot he is in, he tries the only option that he has left. He appeals to his boss for mercy and asks for more time so that he might pay his debt. His boss, who is obviously an outstanding individual, takes pity on him and tells his accountants to erase the debt from his books. And so those who are sent to bring him before his boss release him and tell him he is free to go. As Bernie leaves his boss's home, he spies a fellow employee, let's call him Fred, who borrowed a few dollars from him a while back. Bernie grabs him by the throat and says, "Pay me what you owe." Fred doesn't have the cash on him right at the moment, and he begs Bernie to give him a little more time and he will pay what he owes. But Bernie is unmoved and immediately turns Fred over to a collection agency who will garnish his wages and ruin his credit rating if he does not immediately pay Bernie what he owes. Bernie's boss has just wiped the slate clean of a debt that amounted to millions of dollars. Yet Bernie cannot find it in his heart to give his fellow employee a little more time. Clearly, Bernie has learned nothing from his experience with his boss. So when Bernie's fellow employees see what Bernie has done to Fred, they immediately go to their boss and tell him about what Bernie has done to Fred. After hearing the story, Bernie's boss sends for him to come to his office. Now, as soon as Bernie walks into his boss's office, he sees Fred and many of his other fellow employees there. And his boss asks him, "Don't you remember that I forgive you the enormous debt that you owed to me? Should you not have also had mercy on Fred in the same way that I had mercy on you?" Well, Bernie gulps hard. He knows he's busted. His boss reverses his earlier decision to forgive Bernie's debt and turns him over to the courts until such time as he pays his debt in full. And Jesus says, "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you, unless you forgive your brother from your heart." Jesus demands that we forgive other people based on the fact that as Christians, we have all been forgiven an enormous debt by God. He insists that we make the choice to forgive each and every day and go through the process of forgiveness. And just like physical exercise for our bodies, the more we practice forgiveness, the better we get at doing it, and the stronger that we grow spiritually. There are far too many people who have the idea that forgiveness should be done because of the effect it has on the person being forgiven. However, this is only true if the person who has committed the offense is repentant and is seeking to reconcile, is willing to make restitution, and is asking for forgiveness. In many cases, the offending party will never admit to doing anything wrong, or even appear remorseful for what they have done. But even so, forgiveness must be offered, and the reason it must be offered is because the greatest benefit will be received by the one offering the forgiveness, and not the one receiving it. If we fail to forgive, the person who has wronged us continues to have power over us. But when we forgive, we take away their power. Forgiveness is not saying the offense never happened. It did. Forgiveness is not saying that everything is okay. It isn't. Forgiveness is not saying we no longer feel the pain of the offense. We do. Forgiveness is saying, I still feel the pain, but I am willing to let go of your involvement in my pain. Forgiveness is an attitude of faith whereby we are able to turn over to God the business of how the other person is doing. What forgiveness says is, I'm okay, and I'm willing to let God deal with whether you are okay. And I am willing to let go of my need to be the instrument of correction and rebuke in your life. Forgiveness is totally letting go of any feelings of vengeance or retribution and giving it all over to God. And we do it so that we will not be filled with bitterness and resentment, which can poison our souls. Jesus was careful even to include the principle of forgiveness in the prayer that he taught us. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us, he said. Now, I don't think that I have ever heard anyone claim that forgiveness was easy. But we must all be ready to go through the process of forgiving one another, because that is what God expects from us. And as a regenerate Christian, when we remember the enormous debt of sin that God has forgiven us, we should not have a problem with God asking us to forgive one another, so that we may be salt and light. Amen.